It's my great pleasure to welcome Professor David Yeliang Shah to Wellesley College as the Visiting Associate of the Freedom Project, which is a new venture at Wellesley that explores the multiple manifestations and contours of freedom, human rights, and dissent in the world today. As all of you must know in some form or other by now, Wellesley College was at the center of a controversy over the firing of Professor Shah from his longtime association with Peking University, with which Wellesley has formed a new partnership. As uncomfortable as the situation got at times, I agree with Provost Andrew Shannon that it was better that what happened here because it clarified many issues pertaining to Wellesley's relationships in the world today. Professor Shah had been a member in good standing for many years at the School of Economics. Indeed, he had been highly influential in official circles at the very highest levels, especially in the media. In 2008, Professor Shah began to break away from the world of officialdom and the world of official academe, which is, as you know, or should know, is tightly controlled by the Communist Party of China. I myself studied dissidents for my entire life and have written about them, and one of the first questions I asked them is why would you do such a thing? Why would you sacrifice the safety and comfort of a secure position in favor of a dissident position that would cause him great personal discomfort? And he simply told me, because I could not bear it anymore. That was his answer. And I realized then from his response and the response of all the dissidents I've worked with in my life that position, I could not bear it anymore, is the kernel from which all resistance to tyranny springs and grows. Together with several hundred dissident intellectuals, Professor Shah helped to draft and was one of the first signatories of the famous Charter 08 document, a foundational and revolutionary statement of human rights and the rule of law in China. He worked very closely with Liu Xiaobo, the writer, his friend, and the winner of the 2010 Nobel Peace Prize, who is now serving a long prison sentence for his dissident writings and practices, and also his ill health, I should add, in prison. In the past year, rejuvenated and recirculated, not uncoincidentally this week, there have been many different stories circulating about Professor Shah, about the Freedom Project, and now even myself. These controversies will be worked out in the coming months and even years as we explore the concrete historical details of, quote, whom did what to whom and why, end quote. The one thing I will say now, though, is that from the very beginning, when Professor Shah and I became colleagues, a relationship that has now blossomed into a warm friendship, I took up his cause as did many other members of the faculty at Wellesley College. I know I speak for him when I thank those of you who supported Professor Shah publicly when he was not here to defend himself and when he was undergoing an excruciating process of mortification at the hands of the Chinese regime. I personally believe his cause to be just and vitally important to the future of freedom, not only in China but in the world at large. I was hugely gratified last night to see him address a crowd of Chinese students and others in this very room in Chinese about the situation in modern China, and very importantly, be physically present here at Wellesley College to defend himself personally, which is the right of all human beings, against charges and negative things that were said about him last year. I was particularly happy to see many Chinese students debate and argue with Professor Shah, and it was clear to all present that many of the students were for the first time talking openly about controversial issues in the public for the first time. And what really warmed my soul was seeing how students felt free to criticize, and he felt free to criticize back. And I understand there was a Facebook page and a discussion going on after that where students freely shared their opinions, disagreements, and that really is the way it should be. If people were uncomfortable, if people didn't like what they heard, if people didn't like the arguments, that really is the nature of pluralism and free and open public discourse. And it happened here last night. Unfortunately, it was in Chinese, so I had no idea how it happened. I sat and watched, and was very interested to listen to a lecture in a language you can't understand and still see that it's having some kind of effect. My hope for this event is is that it would not be an occasion to go back into the issue of who did what to whom and why, but certainly it would be warranted if Professor Shah were able to finally tell his side of the story, which was sorely lacking in our public space last year. Rather, I asked Professor Shah to talk about the current situation of freedom in China. But there's another reason he is here. Last year, the Freedom Project Advisory Board decided to institute an annual Freedom Project Award for Civil Courage. The idea of civil courage is a very important one in the lexicon of human rights and dissident communities. It defies precise definition, but can best be understood as a resistance to repression and injustice at great personal risk. Civil courage is one of the highest virtues because it entails, in its purest forms, losing everything, even things that are the most dear to you, for the sake of principle. In my mind, the example of civil courage represents one of the highest ideals for Wellesley students who want to truly, quote, make a difference in the world. At the most fundamental level, making a difference means taking risk and even being afraid and fearful, but responding to that risk and fear with courage. So it is my great honor, in advance of the talk, to present Professor David Yeliang Shah with the first annual Freedom Project Award for Civil Courage. It is my distinct honor to present this to him on behalf of the Freedom Project and on behalf of all of Professor Shah's supporters. Now the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Professor Kushner. It's a great honor for me. And also it's a great encouragement. I think it's not only for me, but for my colleagues and all those dissidents fighting against the dictatorship of CCP in China. I feel I'm also very most grateful to the faculty members and students who support me, who have been supporting me all those days in Wesley College. I think it's a very precious support and what's the most needed in the current period. Perhaps people know that since Xi Jinping got the highest power, actually in China, as more and more dissidents has been arrested and put in jail. And some of them even without any opportunity for people to require a lawyer or attorney, and that means they don't have the opportunity to defend themselves. But tonight, I'd like to talk something. It could be more theoretical issues. It's individualism over nationalism in China, facts and potential risk. As people know, in China, whatever the economic development is, and how fast it is, and how good it seems to, how big the economy became, it's still our communist country. But still, it's an ideological control, which was it was so-called supported or controlled by the Marxism and Mao Zedong force. So in the last 10 years, people feel very clear that the Cultural Revolution atmosphere returns. And so I want to show something not only in a theoretical perspective, but also some stories that happened in China in recent days and months. So please forgive me if I cannot talk in a very deep extent about the theory itself. So first we come to the question, what does individualism mean? Why this question is important? Because President Xi Jinping made a so-called very important speech recently. He called on we must oppose individualism and liberalism in China. It's not a new expression. Actually, for the last 6 decades, and even more, from Chairman Mao Zedong and other leaders, they're always there saying to criticize, to oppose liberalism and individualism. I don't know whether they study and any concepts of those individualism or other concepts that they mention, the liberalism. Maybe they have their own context. But since they use this term, so we should understand what individualism means to Chinese, especially for contemporary China. Because they think that individualism is something encourage selfishness, encourage people to go against each other, not in mutual cooperation. Rather, it's kind of their evil competition among the people. Why they keep these terms with so many bad contents and implications? Like they always call capitalism is the worst capitalism, worst institution in the world, in the history. They said that way. But nowadays, people don't believe that, because in China we also adopted some capitalism. If it's not all, it may be partial capitalism. So it may be called China as a state capitalism, or some people call socialist capitalism. It's a queer, right? It's a combination, because we have some market system imported from Western countries. But in the meantime, the ideological control, the humanities education in China, still Marxist, and still under the guidance of communism. And all students in China nowadays, they have also learned those theories, so-called Marxist theory, Mao Zedong thoughts, Deng Xiaoping theory, and three representative theory, and so on and so forth. And now Xi Jinping invented a new one. I don't think he invented it by himself. Some of his advisors say that's a Chinese dream. Chinese dream became a theory. So it means China would like to have a kind of a resuscitation about ancient culture, ancient, what do you call the spirit of China, the great Chinese nation, 中华民族. So it refers more than one. I mean, it refers more on one minority or one nation. That could be Han nationalities, rather than all those minorities. So individualism, if you ask for the definition, I could find the best definition through the internet, and we can have a lot of definition, which was scientific and commonly accepted by the academic world, like this. It's a moral stance and also political philosophy, ideology, or social outlook that emphasizes the moral worth of individual. Maybe it sounds very common to the students and faculty members in the US, but it's very unusual for Chinese, especially for several decades ago. At that time, people always have to believe in collectivism, communism, socialism. Individualism is a very bad term at that time. So people, you cannot say you like your own idea. You can have your own idea. You should obey and should make your force in conformity with other people, and especially with the top leaders. Like 4 decades ago, when Chairman Mao made some speech, and there's maybe at midnight, because Chairman Mao liked to sleep at daytime and working at nighttime. So when he gave some speeches, and all people were waking up to celebrate the new instruction. That's called paramount instruction, 最高指示. So I remember as a child, I often found myself alone at midnight because my parents have to join the parade. It's kind of a propaganda, and the people all feel very excited to shout with some slogans at midnight, and they use some lanterns or use torches to celebrate. And so maybe next day they will say, oh, they will have some new products only because they studied Chairman Mao's slogans. So in that atmosphere, people tends to be telling liars rather than telling truth. Because anyone is telling truth, then you're in danger. So I think the individualism, if we come to the contents and its implication, we feel it is very precious for China, which is lacking for hundreds or even thousands of years in China. Because from the very beginning, from the ancient times even, the people are educated to obey or listen to the wisdom or the paramount instruction of the emperors, or maybe some the great sages like Confucius. Yeah, but even Confucius at his own time is not that respected. When he tried to persuade other kings, and a lot of kings just give him ignorance, and sometimes just turn him down. He had a very bad situation at that time. But his students try to collect all his instructions and words and make one very famous book. So the people nowadays could read those books to understand his thoughts. So I think that we should cherish this value of the individualism, no matter how the Communist Party always regarded it as a very bad thing in China. I remember at my childhood, students always told you have to listen to the teacher's instruction, or parents' instruction, or leader's instruction. You cannot have your own ideas. If you persist on your own ideas, that means you are not educated well. You have to learn. You have to teach yourself always to obey some kind of authority. If there's no authority, the grade, the ranking means authority. For instance, like in the army units, each one, his ranking is higher than you. You should always obey him, whether he's telling the truth or false. But it's understandable in army, even, especially in the wartime, right? It needs a kind of order and to make the war going smoothly. But for the civilians, for the students, for the daily life, family life, you don't have to obey a kind of their instructional orders all the time. So, the national psychology of the Chinese people, the first thing is to learn how to obey, how to compromise, even if you don't agree in your mind. So I just give you a kind of a region or foundation of the ideological logic for the current Chinese people. So that's understandable why so many people in China nowadays, they don't have their independent ideas. They don't know even how to think about it by himself, because it's always some ready answers, some ready solutions from the government, from CCP, from the paramount leaders. So they just save energy, because it's in vain if you try to invent your own ideas, and people would regard you as something very unsocial and how can I say, it's not amicable to sit this situation. So individualism makes individuals its focus and so starts with the fundamental premise that human individual is of primary importance in the struggle for liberation. So liberalism and libertarianism are very strange terms in China. If you say, hey, these days I read some book on liberalism, then people will strangely look at you. Oh, what do you think? What do you try to do with liberalism? They understand the people's freedom. That means you can go outside, and you can go to work and go to school. Then you have your freedom. But they care much less than the real speech freedom, the real freedom for academic work or research. Because in China, whenever you try to apply for funding to support your humanities or social science research, you know where you have to find your funding? It's all controlled by a state-level organization. It's called the National Social Science and Humanities Planning Commission. And this commission is under the leadership of the propaganda department of CCP. So that means everyone, every individual, if you want to do your own business or your research, you have to agree on CCP's values and their theory, their ideology. Otherwise, you cannot get funding. And even you cannot get a promotion if you say something that go against those values. Maybe the young students, they don't have the experience, but in China, many scholars, they have the experience. They try to do their own research, but no way. Even cannot be published. So later on, people say, oh, we have to compromise. We have to survive. In order to get some funding for the research, I have to tell liars. I said, oh, I support Marxism, socialism, communism from the bottom of my heart. Okay, I agree with everything you said. Then later on, I got the funding. And maybe I'm turned back and say, just bullshit. I don't believe it at all. But anyway, I got money. So this situation continued for years and years until now. And even it's getting nowadays getting even worse. You know, I told the students, Chinese students here, I said you are so lucky. If you study in China nowadays, you have to learn those. I will call them it's a bullshit. Communism, socialism, Marxism, all those things. You have to recite. You have to pass your courses, whether you like it or not. So, wasting a lot of time. You know, during my graduate years, I spent a lot of time on Marxist works, on Capital, all those selected works, and Lenin's works, Stalin's works, and Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping's works. Just wasting a lot of time. Otherwise, I can learn a lot of other disciplines, other valuable courses. So that's one thing, I think, whether you agree or not my ideas, but one thing, you just judge by yourself. If the Chinese education is so good, why the national leaders always send their children to study in US, in Western countries? That's very simple, right? Why they think the capitalism is a very bad institution? They send their children, they send their wives to live in US, to get that residence and to transfer their capital and wealth into Western countries. So, judge people whether he believes something is based on his action, not only his speech. There's a lot of implication on individualism. But individualism is not too long if you just call this term. Maybe people cherish this value for a long time, but as a theory, a theoretical term, it's only about 100, maybe 70 years. Yeah, it starts as by the Alvinists in the late 1830s. So it seems to be also have some connection with the socialists or with those people who have the dream of socialism. And more positive use of the term in Britain came to be used with the writing of James Elishman Smith. So I think I'm not trying to interpret all those terms because you know better than I do. As a Chinese, my mother tongue is Chinese, so it always not only for language, for terms, but always some difficulty to understand fully of the context and implication of some ideas. But for some common core values, that's universal. So there's no difficulty to understand, and also it's no difficulty to disseminate in China. Some people say, like Smith argued, without individualism, individuals cannot amass property to increase one's happiness. So if everyone will, no matter how much can you create for the society, you have to contribute to a community and let the leader of the community to distribute your wealth or your income. Do you think it's an ideal institution like a socialism and communism refers to? At the very beginning, I think in China, I think the majority of people believe in this story because the Communist Party always told people the best and the ideal society is communism because every people are equal. Whenever you got some contribution, and they'll be distributed equally and fairly. But that was not true. When I was a child, I suffered a lot from the shortage of the consumer goods. At that time, even the sugar is something hard to get because children always like to eat some sugar. At that time, everything was in the planned economy, everything was controlled. If you want to buy a small box of matches, you have to pay not only money, but also with coupon. If you don't have the coupon, you can't purchase. Even you go outside, you want to purchase some bread, steamed bread, you also need kind of grain coupon. Without grain coupon, you cannot eat. So at that time in China, people are so hard to travel. You're not allowed to travel. Even you want to live in the hotel, you need a letter of introduction. If you want to purchase a ticket of an airplane, that means your ranking is not sufficient to sit airplane. Only those people is above the magistrate level, 县级, that's possible for you to travel with the airplane. And the sleeping part of train. And also, you have no right to get your family phone. Only the minister level officials, they can have their telephone in their home. So by and by, it's getting lower rankings, but not every people. I mean, after 1984, I think 1984 and 5, and more people in China, urban people can apply for their own family phones, but not every city, only very few small cities, few big cities. For Hefei, capital city in Anhui province, only by the early 90s, then individual can apply for their family phones. I remember at that time I applied for several months and I got approval. And then I have to pay like $1,000 equal to pay for the installation. And then you have to pay every month for the expenses. Very expensive. It's a luxury to have. But people feel very happy at that time because it sounds you enjoy the privilege enjoyed by the officials before. Now you can enjoy it. So I think the early 1980s in our life is the most free and open time compared with the current situation. People don't believe that. People say, how come? Everything has a progress. How can you say China, the most free and open time is early 1980s? I think that Chinese students, if you ask your parents, then they will tell you the truth. At that time, there's much more, opportunities for individuals to get some consumer goods they have never dreamed of before. The first TV, the first refrigerator, first telephone, first car. First car is by the end of 1990s. For some people, maybe early 1990s. That's after the market economy started. So market economy in China is not real in 100% sense. It's only partial, limited market economy. So some people, if you call China as a capitalist system, it's not true. It's only partial. In what sense? It's only in economic sector. In some sectors, not all sectors. You know, in China, private sectors actually made majority of the contribution to the national economy. There's some data shows for the last 20 years, there's I think 75% GDP was contributed by private firms. Less than 25% contributed by SOEs, the state-owned enterprise. But even for SOEs, those firms always took the monopoly in a very, in many profitable industries. For those hard and less profitable industries, then they let the private firms to take that. But even then, they make a huge profit. They still enjoys a huge sum of subsidies from the state government, like China Petrol, like China Chemical, and also many, like Telecom, China Mobile, all those big companies. They make big fortunes, but they never share those fortunes with the average Chinese citizen. I mean, the average Chinese citizen, they have hardly any benefits or welfare shared by those big firms. So if you ask yourself, as a Chinese citizen, what kind of benefits and welfare can you enjoy in your city? In China, only Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, those big cities, they have a better public facilities for average Chinese citizen. But for the majority of the cities in China, they have a very poor, shabby public facilities. And nowadays, of course, something has been changed. And in many cities now, they have the construction of the railway, subway, and parks, and sports, all those stadiums, all those things. But even that, with some very beautiful, huge investment, the stadium was built into something luxury. But after a certain game, like the Olympic Games, when Olympic Games was over, and those stadiums just stay there for nothing. It's not open for the public. Only some stars and singers, when they need to have the performance, then they use that. But average citizen, if they say, hey, I want to use that gym, I want to use that the playgrounds for the children, it's not possible. So I hope some students here can argue with me, because I have a lot of facts to answer. Olympic Games, all those the sports grounds nowadays, some of them because lacking of management and maintenance. Nowadays, almost got a lot of troubles with facilities. So those things, when the Chinese government doing those things, they just want to make kind of miracle to show, always showing off to the outside world. And after the showing off, then they just shut it down. They don't intend to use it effectively. They don't want to share it with the average Chinese citizen. So that's the problem. The collectivism and nationalism always in a very high profile. When the person, individual person, if you want to say, I should fight with my own rights, I need more benefits, you feel it's difficult. Whom you are going to tell? Whom you are going to argue with? Nobody really listens to you. Of course, when people say, oh, when there's People's Congress, then that's opportunity for you to make suggestions, to make a criticism. Do you think is that possible? I tried myself. As a Beijing resident, I tried for many years. 10 years ago, I tried at least 3 years to apply opportunity to attend and audit the Congress, the Beijing Municipal Congress. It was supposed to be open to at least 20 or 30 persons each year. But when, at the first time you found in the newspaper, you make the phone call to that number. It always says, it's occupied all the time. It's always busy. No people pick up your phone. And eventually you make the phone through, then people told you, okay, the quotas are full and all occupied, and you cannot apply it anymore. I tried it several years. It failed. Yeah. That's a national library in Beijing. It's compared with Congress library. It's the biggest in China. It's a huge collection. As a Beijing citizen, and also I'm the professor of economics in Peking University, I want to use that library. Apply for the library card is very hard. Not only your ID, but also need a letter of introduction and to tell the rankings. Only very few people above the rankings, you can get the library card to borrow. Even if you got the card, you borrow 5 books at one time. And normally it's 1 month. It's very high fine if you cannot return book on time. And it's very hard to find your book. If you give the catalog numbers to the librarians, you probably wait for half an hour to get the book because they have to search in the storage for a long time. So whenever they are boasting how many books that they have in this library, it means nothing to ordinary people. If you try to find some the history archives, and people say, no way, you are not qualified to read that files. That's a secret. So only some high-ranking officials are qualified to read those files. But actually, those officials never try to consult with those files. So that's a contradictory, right? When people say serve the people, the leaders always say that way, serve the people. So what kind of people they really want to serve? Only high-ranking officials and some privileged people. So many stories to tell the truth in China. So the first time I remember in the library of the UCLA, I asked the librarian a question. I said, how many books could I borrow for one time? Then that librarian laughed at me. How many books do you think you need to borrow for one time? 200 books is enough. I got shocked. It really meant that. He said, if you want to borrow 200, you could have it. So it's very admirable to share those resources. So as a student studying in the US, you must have the same feeling when you came the first time, right? And individualism and society. So what's the relationship between the individuals and society? in a free, open society, individuals are encouraged to have your own ideas, your personal opinions, and your invention, your creation, your contribution, whether it was judged as good or not. Because who can judge your thinking or your ideas, whether it's valuable or not? But in China, people are supposed to always judge it by others. For instance, in China, always some people, they are in charge of to guide or correct the whole people's thoughts, ideological works. Who did that? Is the Department of Propaganda of CCP. They are in charge of all the national people's ideas and thoughts. That means they control your thinking. And in 2009, in May, I wrote a letter to the head of this department, propaganda department of the CCP. He's a very high-ranking guy. His name is Liu Yunshan. Now he's one of the 7 top leaders in China, in charge of the ideological control. I said, in what way do you think you're qualified to judge other people's thoughts and thinking? You have a poor education record. How can you judge other people whether they are good or not? Because this guy, they only have he had the education of the middle school, like your, what do you call high school diploma. That school only, his major is a political education. That's a middle level education diploma. 是中等师范学校，然后政治教育专业毕业。That's his own education, the whole education. And then later on, of course, he went to the Central Party School in Beijing. I don't think that is called education because it's kind of a training of the CCP's ideology. So it's not a real education. Yeah. But this guy tends to charge any works, any books, if they think it's not right, he said it's not right, it cannot be published. And even if it's published, he said burn it, destroy it. Not himself. I mean, he had a huge team or ranks work for him. How many people in China for this job? I think 500,000. 500,000 people just doing those jobs. Say, oh, whether this work, this research is valuable or not. If they think it's not correctly in political sense, that means it cannot be. It should be banned. Banned for publication, banned for dissemination all the time. And in these 2 years, it's getting even worse. I just got a message a week ago about several of my friends, their books are banned to publish. Like Professor Mao Yushi, a senior economist, he's 85 years this year. His books has been banned. And also Professor Yu Yingshi, the former Princeton professor, who taught at also Harvard and Yale for many years. His books is about the classical Chinese philosophy. And even those books cannot be published. And even after publication, it cannot be sold in China. And then these days, all books have been withdrawn from the shelves and to be burned or to be destroyed. And many stories happened in this 1 or 2 years. So I would like to mention Rousseau, famous philosopher, and claims that his concept of the general will and the social contract is not a simple collection of individual wills, and that it furthers the interests of the individual. That's more further interpretation on that. So I think the people living in Western countries, they takes this for granted because it's everyday life, it's a common sense But for the people living in China, or even the young students that came to US, I think that's something totally new to understand and to accept. Because in China, in the education system, those kind of concepts are just go against the collectivism and the communism, nationalism, patriotism, and all those things. There's many things I have to. That's one key concept I will see. Individualism is often contrasted either with totalitarianism or with collectivism. Like people know that the former Soviet Union and all those socialist countries, communist countries, like people living in China and Korea nowadays, they suffer a lot from those things. The famous novel is 1984, and also the Animal Farm. All those books shows the sufferings from that kind of things. I don't expect the kind of the company of the music. There's a lot of things that refer to individualism. So if the young students, especially students who come from China, you are interested in those concepts, I encourage you to read more about individualism. It's very special and very precious for Chinese culture. And also political individualism. And people say, nobody will waste his life accumulating things and symbols for things. One will live. To live is a rare thing in the world. Most people just exist, that's all. So live and survive is different. I think many people in China nowadays, they regard as living, regarding surviving as living. So that's different. There are a lot of things like anarchism and liberalism. Those concepts we should have the comparison with. So I should save my time and not to mention too much about theory concepts. Maybe I should leave some time for you to raise questions and straightforward questions. So a lot of individualism to understand and to read. And here comes the nationalism, because it's a term that's emphasized by the officials nowadays with a special emphasis. Nationalism actually is when a country they are more and more confident about their economy, about their daily life. And they said, especially the top leaders in China nowadays, think we should not be satisfied with the followers of the rules. We'd rather to be the setter of the game rules. For instance, like the WTO and all the international rules and organizations, China should have a more contribution in wealth, and also they should have the more say on the public issues. And nationalism also shows the people they try to have the war with neighboring countries whenever they said that some disputes on the territory issues, like the island disputes with Japan, many things like that. And so nowadays the Chinese Navy is building the 5th aircraft carriers, and I guess by the year 2020 there will be 5 aircraft carriers, and it's something that's going further to the ocean. It's not only for the defense itself. So uprising, does it mean that any kind of threat to Western countries? The Chinese leaders always say no, we will not have any threat to the outsiders. But people won't believe that. And also, the people would argue, what is nation mean? What does nation mean? There's a lot of different definitions. For instance, in China, people think Han represents China. Do you agree on that? Because we have the 55 minorities. If you say Han will represent China, then how about those minorities? So you cannot argue with people if you talk about Tibetan issue, Uyghurs issue, Mongolians issue. That's very sensitive issues. You will be in trouble if you talk and search on that. I have a friend who is a writer on the contemporary history of Tibet, and nowadays they lost the opportunity to enter China. The nationalism and anomy and all those things, patriotic nationalism, a lot of things, stuff. Yeah. And Max Weber claimed that the change that developed the modern society and nations is the result of the rise of the charismatic leader. And Deng Xiaoping, of course, is someone who can refer to that. Mao Zedong, some people agree, some people not. But Xi Jinping this time, people think, okay, Xi Jinping has some features of that. But Hu Jintao, people doubt, because Hu Jintao seems very commonplace, and he even don't have his personal expression on his face all the time. And he seldom laugh or smile. I mean, Jiang Zemin is more aggressive, and people regard Jiang Zemin as some people just like a clown, try to show off all the time, and try to be knowledgeable, but actually he's not. But I think it's a good thing for Jiang to tends to be that one, that model style, because let people say you don't have the admiration for the great leader. He's just a common people, maybe just like your neighbor. So I think it's a good thing. And nowadays, when Xi Jinping got power, some people always call you as a stupid if you still consider Xi Jinping as a great man. I think a man, if you call him as a great man, it should, after his great contribution to something, he really did something, right? Before he really doing something, how can you regard him as a great man? Like Obama got a Nobel Prize in Peace. I don't think that he deserved that. It's too early for him to get that prize. So, socialist nationalism is, I think, it's oriented on the left-wing nationalism. So that's anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninism is closely tied with this ideology. And I think for the several decades, the communist countries, they have the similar features of this. And ultra-nationalism, it might be a kind of potential risk, danger. It calls on people to do something irrational. Yeah, it's a very bad thing, dangerous thing. I show you just 2 or 3 years ago, there are some demonstrations in China, and any Japanese-made cars would be smashed without negotiation. And one driver, he just drove the car and he refused to come out. And then a guy used a hammer to smash his head, and he almost died. But he was saved eventually, and his head is just like a big hole on the top of his head. Yeah, and some people even defend for those guys who smashed him. They said, "Oh, it's not his fault. He's just show his patriotism, nationalism, to hate Japanese." Then people would argue, say, if you hate Japanese, then you fight. You join the army first. And nowadays, some people say fight and kill some Japanese. and we should occupy Tokyo and rape their women. And it's some young people call that internet all the time. Not I mean, hundreds of thousands of people say that way. Then people will say, okay, so tell your real name and join the army immediately and fight. And then they say, no, they don't want to say. So those guys, actually, they are, I think that they're trained by the so-called patriotism and nationalism. So I go strongly against those people. I think if you hate Japanese because they have the invasion in China in 1930s, 40s, the Second World War, it's because they made the serious harm to Chinese people at that time. But now you want to repeat, you want to revenge with the same style. So what's the sense in, say, to fight with Japan or hate Japan? You are the same, right? So here the slogan says, 中日宣战, declare war against Japan, and bloodshed Tokyo. This is the saying. And here says, down with little Japan, and defend our islands, fishing islands. And those guys, just crazy, irrational guys. And also, it has some connection with statism. Yeah. That's a seldom used term, but it's true. Nowadays, it's getting stronger and stronger in China. And even the leaders won't mention that, then people can sense that. So, what's the most important things in China nowadays? Pragmatism. Pragmatism for everybody, because you should stick to your material life. You should gain all those properties, money. That's the practice people believe in. I don't think any people believe in communism nowadays in China, even top leaders. Even Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, and Xi Jinping, and their family members. They don't believe in their heart in communism, but rather they believe in practice, opportunism, and also militarism, yeah, because that shows that China is getting stronger and can fight with any country, even with U.S. in the future. So statism can take many forms from, like I mentioned, totalitarianism. That's a word thing. And this term tends to be better. And a lot of people say China should be authoritarianism country. And by that sense, like Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew, who did a lot of things in a tyranny style, but still he did some good things. So nowadays, some Chinese leaders says we should learn from Singapore, make China to be authoritarian country, and they may try it. State socialism, I think it's a bad term, and not only for the communist countries, but also for Hitler, yeah, to develop this kind of ideology. So nowadays, people seldom mention state socialism. More refers to state capitalism. But even for state capitalism, I think it's a bad term for capitalism itself. Because capitalism at least allows people to compete, to have more freedom and more choices. But in China, state capitalism, that means only very small group of people, they can control the fortunes and opportunities in China. Then I have some recommendations and solutions. The correct way is through the constitutional democracy and rule of law, and how we should establish a civil society first. But it's very, very hard to realize it, because in China, any organizations will be considered illegal. That means if you want to establish a society, you said, we study some theory, some ideas. No way. They think it's dangerous. It's dangerous to the social stability. It's dangerous for their mainstream thoughts and ideology. So still try to do something, even under this dictatorship and harsh crackdown. We think the reform is dead and could not be resumed. The only source of hope for promoting and implementing fundamental institutional change. Intellectuals are divided into two or several different groups with different goals. And solutions on internet and media blogging. Right? Of course, nowadays, the control is getting tighter and tighter. And media blogging, and even just a week ago, some people showed their ideas to support the Hong Kong protests. And some 50 persons has been arrested only because they support the Hong Kong protests. There's no law to protect those people. So what's use when this session just finished, they call it rule of law, focus on rule of law, and they say they were building this country based on law. And then they actually emphasize too much on the party's leadership. So when you read this documentary, read about this clip about the session, then people would ask whether it's a rule by party or the rule by law. So that's different ideas. Then we should have a different kind of methods to try to dismantle or try to break the blockings. And of course, we need some help from international community. So that's some suggestions and recommendations, and even the methods, experience, and feasible proposals for non-violence protests and movements. And I think the Hong Kong protest this time is very successful, and they are well trained. They have the very disciplined style, and people they have some basic bottom line, and a lot of things to appreciate. I'm sorry I can't express myself well in English, but I'll try to answer your questions.
I'll start. So I made a list of all the things that you're critical about in China. Nationalism, statism, conformity, anti-individualism, communism as an illusion that's cynically used by leaders, censorship, opportunism, militarism, authoritarianism, state capitalism. That's a lot of things. And I can understand, as a critical sociologist, I can understand exactly why you say those things. I guess the question that some people ask you, and I'd like to ask you too, is, as a colleague, and, even as a friend, is, with all that negative rhetoric, which might actually very well be true, how can one support, how can one make a positive case for what to do in China that people won't just dismiss, because here's the situation. Basically, it's just happened in Massachusetts. I think students should know this. It's been in the news lately, but you probably don't read the news about Massachusetts and the subway system very much. But the state of Massachusetts just signed a contract yesterday with a large state-owned Chinese firm to build railroad cars. Now, what that means is that 556 million just Massachusetts taxpayer dollars are going to a state-owned enterprise in China. And most people are good with that. You know, they say, well, you know, China is what it is. It might be all those things, but, you know, they have their own path, and this saves us a lot of money. It'll create jobs in Massachusetts. What I'm driving at is how can you get people? By the way, we push the governor on this, on the human rights issue. We say something about that. So that's the job of the U.S. State Department, not Massachusetts. I should mention that. How can you get people to not just accept any of these things, but never mind all of them, and just say, well, that's just the way China is. They're a global player, and we just have to deal with them the way they are. You know, how can you break through that? Because when you or I try to break through that, they just accuse us of being anti-Chinese or demonizing China or, you know, being anti-Asian or whatever number of things they use against us. You know, I think there's a real battle here that's being lost. The battle for human rights, for civil society in China, because so many people in the West think you're the bad guy. Or people like me or other people who criticize the Chinese government are the bad guys. And the actual Chinese government seems to get away with gross violations of human rights and more of the same. So I mean, it's like an inversion that really disturbs me, that somehow or another the human rights activists like yourself are the negative parties involved, and the Chinese government is somehow the aggrieved party. There's a lot there, I know.
Yeah.
But I had to say that because it seems like that's where I'm thinking these days. In terms of China.
I'm trying to answer you on this tough job. I think to judge the issue, whether it's beneficial for the local residents in Massachusetts, or whether it's good for the local residents or the Chinese individuals. I mean, SOEs, they make money, but how the average Chinese citizens could share with these profits. And also, I should remind people here that there are several serious accidents happens with the Chinese made high-speed trains in China. So for several years ago, it's Ningbo accidents and other accidents. And when the accidents happen, the government try to hide the truth. They use some cranes to hold those the broken cars, and they try to bury it immediately with the bodies, dead bodies, and they don't want to expose to the media. So later on, the local people found that, and they took some photos with the phone, mobile phones. Then they shared with the social media, and eventually the government suffered from the pressure. And later on, say, okay, we should tell you something, and then something. They were forced to test the truth, but only a partial truth. Up to now, we don't know exactly how many people died during that accident, and who they are, the names. We don't have the name lists, and we don't know what the real reason for the accidents. They said the government promised that we gave you some report after the accidents, but several years now passed. Anybody knows any report about that? What the reason of the accident? No people ask, because it happened in China again, many things. Now people nowadays tends to be forgettable. You always only pay your attention to the current issues, not the past issues. So that's what my immediate response to you. As for whether I'm a good guy or bad guy, whether I like my motherland or not, I think I serve, the people like me will serve like a woodpecker. Woodpecker always eat some bad worms. Yeah, I think we serve that way. So in another sense, we love country, love the motherland better or even deeper than those guys. They call themselves as patriots. Actually, they only always say good thing, and they try to hide bad things. And like a patient, if you always says, oh, he's fine, he has no disease, and eventually he died, right? So as a doctor, you should say, hey, that's some serious problem, we have to treat it. Okay, sorry. Yeah. Some more questions?
How does the students first outweigh?
Pardon?
The students first outweigh?
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question about bringing. I don't know if you wanted, however you choose to coin the term, a approach to China, your goal, I think, what you're talking about, basically it's like the ideal. But given China's history, the people, kind of the culture, I guess we're getting at, would it necessarily, and I guess you know better than me, but would it be appropriate to assume that a democratic or a nationalistic or I don't know, however you choose to define it, way of governance would be effective?
Yeah.
And if it would, then what steps would initially need to be taken in order to implement such governance?
Yeah. That's a good question and a very common question for that. I mean, nowadays people say, what's the solution? The solution would be to end one-party dictatorship and to have the civil society getting bigger and bigger, stronger. And then you have your own election. And I mean, you have the constitutional democracy and the rule of law in real sense. But before you doing that, you need a party, right? But it's not possible in China that nowadays to establish a party. If you set up a party, then you'll be put into jail immediately. So that means something you try to do in great danger and try to promote it little by little. So the most common thing nowadays in China is some people go against to defend their own private properties. That's called Wei Quan. That means defense your own rights, your property rights. So like the landowner, actually there's no landowner in real sense, because in China, all land, the property, the rights, ownership belongs to the country, the state governments. So the farmers, they use that land, the piece of land, but they want to transfer the land to be commercial used and to get more money, right? But each time is the local governments get absolute majority of that, and only very shabby, small sum will go to the rural residents themselves. So there's a lot of local, kind of conflicts for the last 20 years. A lot of the conflicts.
Right. I understand your approach. You don't have to sell me on the solution. I understand the solution, but what I'm questioning is not if the solution is feasible, but if the solution is feasible, then what necessary steps need to be taken in order to kind of synthesize Chinese culture, to kind of combine Chinese culture with a democratic approach? Because a democratic approach is definitely not something that, maybe you know better, but given China's history, what I've learned in my world history class, has never been seen in that sort of culture. It's just, it does not yet have.
Yeah, in my point of view, I don't think the classical philosophy of China will help in those big change. I mean, like Confucian theory. For the majority part of it, it supports the dictatorship, for tyranny. You understand that? For more than 2,000 years, this theory, this system, actually is served the dictatorship, tyranny itself. So, with the Western theory of the either constitutional democracy and rule of law, I think that's the foundation of common values. So that would be the best thing we should import and adopt. Yeah.
But that is dependent on a nationalistic view, which is one of the intrinsic values is being nationalistic to a nation, to some set of values. And I don't know, but how would a democratic China, what set of values, what would it respect the ancient ways or the culture?
I understand what you mean. I mean, we should emphasize on universal values, no borders, universal values for the human being.
Then what's the point of nationalism?
Yeah. So if you emphasize on nationalism, only something you should adopt is for the ancient China, for ancient culture, for ancient philosophy. That's no way. It can't be practiced. I mean, actually, there's nothing in real sense to help. I mean, so when you ask about what is the proper procedure, step by step, like ideal layout of the plan, actually, there's no way. Otherwise, I mean, the regime would have the serious crackdown. They know they try to stop every tendency to try to go against them. So there's no ideal, well-designed program that you can carry on. I mean, people just do something at random. I don't know whether you understand it or not. At random, and you try this, you try that one, and maybe sometime that one will be successful. Who knows? There's no certain solution, no certain some methodology which one should be the first, or which one should be the second. No way. Of course, I know that the best way, the ideal way, should be very well designed, very methodology should be very scientific. But it's in practice, it's no way. Sorry. Yeah.
I have two questions. The first may be a little theoretical. You mentioned that state capitalism, in state capitalism, the top people control most of the wealth, and in real capitalism, there's more freedom offered. I wonder if that's true, because I think even in a totally free market economy, I mean, the closest example I can think of outside of the United States or Hong Kong, their Gini coefficient is very high. I mean, there's huge discrepancy in wealth that's held by the people. A large part of the population is very poor. So I wonder if capitalism really is the solution to.
Do you think you are very confident for what you're saying?
Yeah, because I
Large,
live in Hong Kong.
how large is the proportion in U.S. suffering poverty?
I'm not sure compared to China, but I know in Hong Kong that the Gini coefficient is very high.
Even worse in Korea and China?
I'm not sure
Yeah.
about that comparison, but my point is I don't know if capitalism is a solution to state capitalism. If real
I know people dream of that ideal society. There's no ideal society, unless it's utopia, right? So I often give example like you choose, if the girl looks very beautiful, and if a writer writes something, they say the most beautiful girl in the world, then he could use his words to describe, and everybody agrees that's very attractive. But if you, the director try to find a girl to play that role, you can never satisfy all the people. You understand what I mean, right? Because everyone has their own judgment for beauty. So since there's no such ideal thing, society in the world, just compare with the existing more than 200 nations in the whole world. Which institution is the best? You tell me. Is it the Korea's institution or China's institution or USA or some other?
or do you mean North Korea?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That is a question I cannot answer because I don't know yet.
Yeah, so find out please first. I mean, anyone, if you prefer whether it's Switzerland or it's Sweden or Norway, it's no matter. That doesn't matter. I mean, if you choose one, then still there's something not to your satisfaction, but it doesn't matter. I mean, that's consider by majority of people consider that's a good institution in the world, a good example in the world. So we should learn that good example first. Then later on, probably we can create a better institution in the far, far future, but not now.
I guess my question then is, how do you know that those institutions are better for China?
So you can't say now, even now you don't know it's better than China? I mean, you don't think U.S. institution is better than China? You don't agree on that?
I don't know if that institution can be applied to China.
But the first question is just admit or not. The institution in U.S. and Sweden is better so far than China. Can you agree on that?
In these countries, yes.
Yeah, okay. I'm glad you got a confirmative answer. Yeah, right? So your question, the next question is whether it is good, but how it will be adaptable or it is suitable for China. Who will be the judge? Who will be the judge? You're saying suitable or not?
So I'm saying.
CCP always tell it's not suitable.
Well, so I'm saying that when
Yeah.
they're transferred to China, I don't know if the same institution.
Yeah, you're not certain.
Can be.
Since you're not certain, it's good to try, right? You have never get any option for you can have an experiment on socialism, on communism, How can you be sure that will be successful? But the leaders, they made the decision without consultation, without negotiation with the people. And they did make that decision, right?
That is true, but do you think that when we try, we should consult with people too? And do you think it will be
Yeah, let people vote.
for
Give
whether,
people
for whether
the,
they want state
universal
or cap?
suffrage. Universal suffrage. Let people decide. Do you think it's a good idea?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My second question is this: when you mentioned that militarism in China,
Yeah.
and China's military spending is getting higher and higher, they're doing 5
Mm.
So my question is this: the U.S. military spending is greater than the next 12 countries combined, and the U.S. has a functional aircraft carrier that, while China's aircraft carrier can barely float.
Yeah. That's all seen by CCP. Let me say, if
I heard this
yeah.
from a wealthy professor, I assure you. I assure you, I did not hear this from.
Yeah, but my point is, if North Korea had the similar scale of that national or the military power, so do you think it would be dangerous? Or Sweden have the similar scale? You think it would be more safer?
So why is it more dangerous for China to have that military power than for the U.S. to have that military power?
You don't have the answer?
Can you give me the answer?
Yeah, that's different institutions. So those totalitarianism, those countries, they are much depend on their top leader. Like in North Korea, Kim Jong-un, if he likes to make a nuclear weapon,
I
then
would prefer if you could keep the case for China instead of going to North Korea.
okay, in China. But even with Xi Jinping's power, he can easily make that decision if he want to use nuclear weapon. If he really want to use. If you cannot be convinced, then Mao Zedong has a definitely, absolutely power to decide to use nuclear weapon. Do you believe that?
I think if he tried, he could, but he couldn't explode in any other country than in China itself. Because the Chinese military at the time, during Mao's reign, didn't have the power to
No, at the time they had the atom bomb already.
They had the atom bomb, but
Yeah.
they didn't have the power to carry over the Atlantic Ocean to the United States. They couldn't bomb anyone else. Right now, China.
No, I don't understand you. At that time, he also can use a nuclear weapon
Right, but
towards
he
Soviet
didn't
Union
have
and
the-
US.
He didn't have the long-range missile to fire.
That's not the issue. We can use the atom bomb anyway, if he want to use.
The long-range missile capability wasn't there. Like, he couldn't fire it across.
Why you just emphasize on one issue? I mean, in general, it can make war at that
Well,
time.
okay, so I
Yeah.
guess my general point is that because, so now China may have the long-range nuclear capability to fire the missile to the United States, but do you think that under this international system now with the UN and everything, can you really overturn that system? Does China have the capability to overturn this international system that's been established for over 100 years?
What do you mean by that?
Can China overturn? Are you suggesting that China is a force that can overturn the U.S.-led multipolar world order now?
I think that China will become another superpower, like the former Soviet Union.
And would that pose a threat to world peace?
Hmm?
Would that pose a threat to world peace?
I think it should be kind of the international threat if the military power is big enough. Yeah, I know your logic is to compare, since the U.S. have that power, we should have the similar power. It's a nationalist idea. But the problem is, what kind of country, if they have the similar weapons, and what danger the people would judge? You think that the same level, like Iran, like North Korea, if they have the nuclear weapon, whether it's safer for them to have, or for the Sweden or Switzerland they have.
I think regardless, they would be scared of the second strike capability that the U.S. has. So if, say, country A fires a missile to country B, then country A would be scared that country B would fire back, have a retaliation strike. It's a theory advanced by Kenneth.
So your point is it's justified to have the more nuclear weapons or all those national.
That's not the point I'm trying to make. I'm saying I think it's difficult for China now to try to use nuclear weapons because.
Why is it difficult?
Because they would be scared of the retaliation or of their standing internationally. Like I think China still thinks.
You don't understand Chinese leaders. Let me tell you,
Perhaps I do.
Mao Zedong once said, if we would fight with Soviet Union with a nuclear weapon, even half of the population dead, we still have 300 million.
But do you think Xi thinks the same way?
She is very much admire Mao and Putin.
But don't you think he is restrained to a higher extent by China's international standing?
You see, by and by, you show that she shows his control of all kind of power. You understand why he took the power even from Premier Li Keqiang. He actually he's in control of all kind of power nowadays.
Can we open it up a little bit? I appreciate the line.
Yeah.
No, don't be sorry at all. It's just I think there are other people that want
I
to
have more questions. Yeah, yes.
You expressed how powerful China's leaders are. Have you ever been afraid of being so openly critical about Chinese government?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know some of the people, not only me, we think about that. So whether it's important to be safe, keep silence all the time, and make money and get what you want, then that's your whole life, right? I want to make efforts to do something different. I want to change the fate of the future generations, not only for my child, and for generation after generation. I think the Chinese, when they appear in international community, should be treated or respected, not only because they are rich, they're getting rich, but also because they are well educated, well behaved, and they have a precious value to cherish. And so nowadays, it appears that it doesn't show the Chinese. A lot of people, they got rich, and they got the dirty money, and they show off all the time in the luxury, the shops, stores. Yeah, a lot of things like that. So I wish, even make some great efforts, even some sacrifice, try to change. I think actually the hope depends on you, your generation, because it's not my responsibility and obligation. The nation's future depends on all the people. If you don't want change, then it's okay. If you ask 1.3 billion people, do you like to change it or not? If the majority, absolute majority of people think the institution is good enough not to change it. So I agree. I would not do anything anymore. But nowadays I found more and more people in their mind, they think that it should be changed. But they are not to speak in public. So I speak for them. I mean, a risk for them. Then people will say, oh, why you escape to US? Actually, I have the preparation, good preparation for the jail. I do not dare fear to be put in the jail if this is worthwhile. Yeah, I mean, someday, I also have the danger or risk, because someday I'll visit China again. I could be put in the jail, but I will not fail that. I think it's worthwhile. Okay, gentlemen.
When you were here last,
Yeah.
this summer or late spring,
Yeah.
You spoke with the faculty, and I was there, and addressing a very similar issue. And you said toward the very end that the total collapse of the current system in People's Republic of China was inevitable. May not be soon, but it will be inevitable. You also said today that gatekeepers of all these isms, statism, authoritarianism, and among others, you said they are sending their own children for education in the West, in the United States. Bo Xilai's son,
Yeah.
who had gone to Harrow School and Oxford and then Harvard,
Yeah.
and Bo Xilai's wife was accused
He
of...
could be the future leader if that without the accident.
without that, the murder, yeah,
incident.
allegedly committed by his wife, who allegedly murdered an Englishman who had helped their son go to Harrow and Oxford.
Yeah.
Now, if the gatekeepers of China are sending their children for education in the West, in the United States, would that lead to the collapse of the current system which you had envisioned?
No way.
So why are they here, the children?
I remember last time I said the same thing. Like Kim Jong-un, he had education in Western countries.
Yeah, in Switzerland.
Yeah. I visited Nigeria in early 1990s. I found the governors and a lot of officials they had education in Britain and USA. But when they go back, return, their rule is even worse than the previous leaders. So it doesn't, you can't take we take that for granted because there always should some people to push, to have, try to change the situation. And not just keep their own beneficial atmosphere. Like Bo Xilai's son, if he got the power, if he to be the future leader, why he should change the institution? Because it's good for them to have to control the power. Yeah.
How do the Chinese leaders understand the collapse of the Soviet Union?
Yeah, they think it's something they should try to avoid. Yeah, Xi Jinping mentioned that. She said at that time they shoot some brave boy to stand up, but unfortunately there are not a single brave boy to stand up to stop this the bad trend. So he means that he wants to be the boy to stop the trend. I don't think he can stop because of this trend. Nobody can stop. The trend towards constitutional democracy and rule of law. It can never stop.
I think we have time for one more.
But did anything good arise from it? And is it possible that these people now will try to come together and engage in similar protests as in Hong Kong?
Yeah, so this time Hong Kong made a good example. I think the people in mainland China nowadays, they're fair. Young students like them, normally they won't have this kind of protests. And some even, they're brave enough to have. Then they will consider whether it's, like you said, whether it's possible for them to have the massacre or not. So if that shows any signals, as the older generation, we should not encourage them to risk because it's very cruel. So parents always tell their children, don't get in any trouble in politics. So some parents, they never tell the truth about Tiananmen massacre. In China, I think that only a small proportion of people would understand what the Tiananmen massacre is. But the one thing, I think the one topic today, the focus is on individualism. I think more and more people should aware that individualism is very important. You should defend your own rights on all respects, like freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of publication, all things. You can never compromise on that. If you just pursue the present benefits, then you will lose in the end. I think you will lose in the end. Some people, just like I mentioned, other people said that you just survive, you are not living. Without conscience. You just survive in this world. You live your material life. But you live a life without soul, without conscience, without justice. I don't believe that the younger generation would be satisfied in this life. Since your parents provide your opportunity, then you just make more money, make your family comfortable and enjoyable. That's not enough. In my generation, we have kind of a goal. It's called the higher goal for the society. Of course, you said I have the similar thing. We want to contribute to society. Yeah, I believe everybody could contribute more or less. But when China came to this specific moment, I think this moment, it's very unusual in 2,000 years or even 3,000 years. So this is the time to change the fundamental institution in China. It doesn't mean you change it only top leaders. I can't guarantee that I will be a good leader if that without any supervision, without the rule of law. I could be corrupted. But I think that the fundamental institution change is definite. With that institution, even Bush Lee's son, even Xi Jinping's daughter, they should obey the basic rules. They cannot violate the rules. So that's my dream. If you ask my Chinese dream, that is my own dream, personal dream. It's not for big fortune. It's not for big fame. It's only let my people will be as free and as equal as the people living in the United States. I don't understand some people. They enjoy the freedom and opportunities in U.S. in Western countries, but they still think the China's institution is best, or even no less better than the other countries. So maybe you are young, you are innocent, you haven't seen so much real cases. You haven't had your own experience, but your parents, your grandparents could tell you something. You can find something through the internet, since there's a blocking in China. It's hard for the ordinary people to get that message, but now you can get it. So you can forgive yourself if you keep to the United States for 5 years or even more. You still think U.S. is no better than China. Of course, I don't mean that U.S. don't have the shortcomings, have some defects, many defects, I would say. But comparatively speaking, so far, for the political system, it's still the best in the world, or one of the best, if not agree on that. Can you say North Korean and China's institution is better than the Western's? I really don't believe that. Sorry about sometimes I choose my emotions.
We appreciate everybody coming and also asking questions. Appreciate it.
最后要用中文说几句话，就是大家这么短时间不一定能够完全了解我的想法和我的一些主张。如果你们愿意了解我，可以在网上搜索，包括我最近也发表了一些文章。刚刚在这个 Foreign Policy 就是外交政策杂志上发表有关中国法。所以我希望大家不要因为我今天这个可能没有来得及深入的阐述，有些问题可能还不能够一下说服。但是我很愿意跟大家交流，如果你们愿意加我的微信啊，或者是 Facebook， 我都很欢迎。但是你们不要再受那个中共那种宣传，就认为我是一个汉奸、爱国贼、分裂主义什么这些，这样的都是阴谋论，把我说成是十恶不赦的坏人。那我能够卖中国的一寸土地吗？真正卖国的是毛泽东和江泽民，你们不知道吧？就是毛泽东把这个长白山天池的一部分送给了这个朝鲜。那个江泽民跟这个普京他们签了那个协议，就是跟叶利钦签了那个领土协议，把以前的那个很多领土都送给了这个俄罗斯。所以很多的最近的一个事情大家知道，这个买石油，跟俄罗斯签了一个10年的石油合同，现在的价格是85美元一桶，但是我们是135美元一桶，10年跟他们签的这个价格。所以说这些东西，我觉得你们真的是有些学生真的是 too young too simple 不要生气啊！我这样说不是对你们有所冒犯。 真的是我的心情很迫切，我非常希望你们能够了解更多，因为你们在国内受到教育的这么少，而现在你们在国外有更多的机会去了解，就是这样。所以我欢迎任何时候我在华盛顿 DC， 如果你们有机会去，我愿意跟你们更多的交流，让你们知道我是一个什么样的人啊。你说谁不爱国？每个人都爱自己的国家，但是我是因为外语方面来爱国家。我希望我的国家将来改变了制度以后，我们在各个方面都可以跟西方那些列强可以跟他们相提并论，而不仅仅是因为我们现在通过榨取普通老百姓的这种血汗钱，然后呢让他们处于一种压迫的状态，然后让中国所谓强大起来，这种呢是一种不平等。大家都能看到，现在直到今天，中国还有很多人连起码的温饱都没有解决。你们有没有听说过，在北京有很多人住在那个地下那个井盖底下，常年住在那个底下，对吧？所以这个事情怎么来解决？江泽民、李鹏的家族这个腐败国家，你们不是一点不知道。刘志军，铁道部部长刘志军，他究竟他把《红楼梦》剧组整个都碎了，然后呢，他贪污了那么几百亿人民币，拿其中20亿去买福建人。如果这个案子不出来的话，他就当上总统。所以这样一个国家，你还在认为我这样子很激烈？昨天有一女生说我这个说这些词用无耻是不是说太厉害了？我说用无耻已经不够了。那你说，假如说我们找不到一个完美无缺的时候，我们宁肯要一个更差的时候。就是说，仅仅资本主义和社会主义，我这样你直接的回答，资本主义和社会主义这两种是哪一种目前是比较啊？对，你的意思说瑞典可以是吧？对，这个说的都很好听，但是你能不能给我一个直接的回答？我们是觉得这个美国的这种资本主义是不好的，那我们可以，比如说瑞典的、挪威的那些、瑞士的，是不是可以？对，那是民主社会主义啊，有人把它叫做民主社会主义。但是实际上那个东西，你到了那个国家，你会发现那个国家也有，也不是很好。对。所以像这种情况，我想这一点我们达成共识，就是说我们至少觉得这些制度都比现在的制度重要，所以我们必须我们在达到那个完满的目标之前，我们首先要改善，把这个目前的状态把它变掉，对不对？这点我想我们达到共识。你不能说等，我们等个50年、100年，我们再去向跟理想目标去迈进。就像跟珠穆朗玛峰，比如说现在有5个队已经成功登顶了，但是你说我不要走前人走过的道路，我非得发现一条新的路径，因为你从来你没有登过这个珠穆朗玛峰，你说要探一条新路，是不是送死了？是不是肯定送死了？你应该是首先比较安全的办法是，这5条路人家都已经上去了，我们沿着人家上去的路试一试。如果我们成功登顶了几次，我们5条路都登过了，都上去成功了，我们再去探索一条新路，是不是更好、更安全？
是，但是
对啊。因为我知道，这个在中国长大的孩子，从小这个意识形态，从啊，你香港你是出生在香港吗？
我在北京。
对啊，还有的父母啊，还有这个各方面的影响，对吧？各个方面。所以呢，我知道这个很困难，我自己跟我的思想斗争了很多年，是吧？我是脱胎换骨的这样一种思想的改造，自己跟自己改造，啊。你看我们那一代人，你想想，原来是比你们更前进啊，支持毛主席啊，支持这个共产党，对不对？
我只觉得资本主义。
It's always good to have somebody who's willing to tell how there's another way to do this.
你就好比要猪跟这个马配，不可能的，有些东西是不可能结合的，因为人总是有一些幻想说结合。那邓小平也是这样想的。说把社会主义跟资本主义结合在一起，现在结合的只是怪胎，目前就是一个怪胎啊。所以很多的问题，经济上虽然发展了一点，但是有些问题它不能解决的，污染问题、教育问题、贫富分化的问题、腐败问题，这都解决不了。尤其这次四中全会，你看一下公报，他一再强调坚持党的领导。然后呢，他们经常讲的一个矛盾的话，就是党的利益至上，人民的利益至上，国家的利益至上，讲3个至上，哪个利益至上呢？最终还是党的利益至上。所以这个依法治国讲了半天，最后都要坚持党的领导，没有党的领导就没办法依法治国。那最后还是说以党来治国，是叫党治，不是法治。
我同意您说的这个法治。
所 所以呢，我想，因为我可能太急躁了，你们还有很多的时间去观察、去了解。当然，我们是经历了这整个的改革开放这30多年来，我们原来是对中央有很高的期望。我曾经是在中南海、在钓鱼台国宾馆、在西山会议给中央这些领导人经常见面，提供这个决策咨询的。但是后来我变成，我现在已经被列为敌人了。江泽民、曾庆红这些领导人，胡锦涛、温家宝我都见过。过去是算给他们提供政策咨询，但今天我已经被他们看作敌人。那个国防大学拍的那个文献纪录片叫《较量无声》，你们网上去查一下。他说美帝国主义美国以美国为首的西方反华势力阴谋推翻中国这个统治，然后呢，他们在中国有几个代理人，这几个代理人的名字是毛于轼、贺卫方、夏业良。就已经这个片子什么时候拍的？是去年的6月份就拍的。这个片子拍出来以后就交给中央政治局去。我是什么时候被北大开除的？是10月份。也就是说，我在被北大开除之前，我已经被军方，就是国防大学政委刘亚洲亲自组织的片子，我已经被军方定为不是黑名单了，已经是敌人。西方反华势力阴谋颠覆中国。但是我觉得从政治学理论上，如果你们学政治学理论就知道，颠覆政权是合理的、合法的。就是如果这个政府腐败透顶的话，颠覆它是合理的。你知道美国第1修正案为什么美国第2修正案为什么要合法持有枪支？保护自己的私有财产是第2位，第1位就是当这个政府不合法、不合理的时候，公民有推翻政府的权利。请大家看一看这段，好吧？所以呢，中国假如说有枪支的话，那么贪官腐败的这些人就不会那么嚣张，像李王的女儿就不会那么嚣张。李王的女儿太嚣张了他们贪取了中国那么多的财富，他说都是他自己的本事，跟你这个父亲一点关系没有。对，我只是这么说，未来的中国是有一天。当然，我知道你说的意思就是说，现在如果你有枪支的话，对，天下大乱。但是你想，首先政府是感到最有威胁的，因为政府会被推翻。
考虑一下，您认为是假手？
我知道，我没有见过他，但是他这么恶毒的攻击我，因为我知道他的背景，他是这个是统战对象，他在中国还有职务，他每年拿很多的钱。所以呢，他这样攻击我，到现在他还是中国共产党党员，然后他有很多的事情，就是说已经有人在网络上揭露他。下一个问题就是说，如果他继续的这样的这个抹黑我的话，我请求联邦调查局和这个国税局调查他。请转告，如果有机会告诉国调查局。如果他足够的干净和足够的自信，那他就迎接挑战，看他有没有拿不该拿的钱，有没有干不应该干的事情在中国。我是很坦然的，比如说我在美国，我有没有拿不该拿的钱，有没有干不该干的事，这个都是公开的，我所有的言论写的文章。我的态度上可能有点急躁，但是我是真的是
因为我正好我在我